Most days, the headlines are loud, but the moments that save us, they whisper. Tonight, 10 quiet acts, ordinary human, kept me going. A circle of phone flashlights on a sidewalk, a pharmacist who stayed 3 minutes late, a forgotten chair that somehow knew where it belonged. Take a breath. Sit with me. Story 1. Story 1. The Sidewalk Search Party. Sometimes, hope is the circle of light strangers make with their phones. I didn't see the earring fall. I only heard the sentence that follows a small disaster. Oh no, 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 no. A woman 2 steps ahead of me froze mid-stride, hand to her ear, palm suddenly empty. The sidewalk was the worst kind of carpet. City gravel embedded in tar, freckled with glitter from 1,000 previous losses. She crouched and began the panicked gaze we all know, the one that tries to bully the ground into giving something back. It was early evening, not yet dark, just that blue hour that makes glass look honest. People flowed around her the way water flows around a stone. I stopped because I recognized the sound she made when she exhaled, somewhere between a laugh and a curse. Earring? I asked. She nodded, eyes wet with the math of sentiment. My grandmother's, she said, and the word changed the task. We weren't looking for jewelry. We were looking for a person. Okay, I said, the way a coach says, we practice now. I turned on my phone flashlight and angled it low to slice light across the ground. Sidewalks confess when light comes from the side. Within seconds, another light joined mine, then another. A guy in a delivery jacket said, I've got 5 minutes. A teen with a skateboard laid flat on his stomach like a gecko and peered under the bench. Someone kneeled with the seriousness usually reserved for prayer or lost contact lenses. The woman put a hand to her chest, as if to keep her heart from falling too. We fanned into a loose circle, each person taking a wedge of concrete. Describe it, someone said, and the woman did. Tiny, gold, leaf-shaped, the kind that hooks rather than snaps. It should shine like... She stopped and let the light try to do the talking. Every city block has its soundtrack. This one had buses sighing, a dog debating a pigeon, laughter from a bar that thought itself a little funnier than it was. Over all of it, the murmurs of people deciding to help. Not here. What about the curb? I'll check the grate. Careful. Glass. The teen scraped a twig across the seam where the slabs meet. The delivery guy used his pocket knife to dislodge pebbles with the delicacy of a dentist. Minutes passed. It would have been easy to give up and rebrand the loss as a lesson about attachments. But grief had made the woman small, and our circle made the sidewalk feel less predatory. We kept looking. I thought about all the things we drop in a day. Keys, patience, a sentence we wish we hadn't said, and how often we pick them up alone. Then, from near the curb, a sound like a spoon kissing a saucer. Got something? The skateboarder said, voice flat with the caution of hope. He pinched at the crack, cursed gently, and then lifted his fingers with the triumph of a magician producing a coin from behind your ear. There it was, gold, leaf-shaped, a little dusty, still itself. The woman covered her mouth with both hands and made a sound that could have been a laugh or a sob trying out a disguise. She took the earring as if accepting a fragile heirloom from a museum curator. Thank you, she told the gecko boy. Then all of us, then the street. She pressed the back closed, hard enough to promise. My grandmother wore these to every wedding, she said. She would have haunted me. We laughed because it was a relief to imagine a ghost that cared about outfits. The delivery guy checked his watch and then didn't leave. He had earned the ending with us. We gave the sidewalk one last sweep for the partner earring, just in case, because stories want symmetry, even when reality doesn't. No second miracle, only the one we'd come for. The circle loosened, lights clicked off, people moved back into their errands and routes, dispersed like a handful of salt in soup. I walked the rest of the block with the woman, because momentum felt rude. She told me her grandmother used to say that jewelry should be "son you can wear." She laughed at how many times she had almost not worn the earrings today, how 5 different selves had argued in her bathroom mirror. "I'll buy extra backs," she said. "I'll buy 100. She wiped her eyes and looked taller than she had when we started. At the corner, we split with a half-stranger's vow. We'll see each other around, which never requires fulfillment to be true. I turned left toward my evening and realized I was walking more gently, as if the ground could be persuaded toward kindness if I was. I passed the teen with the skateboard. He gave me a chin lift. I decided to interpret as we did good. We did. That night, I opened a small drawer where I keep my own sentimental junk and took out a button from a coat I no longer own. Why do I still have this? Because I remember the day it popped and the stranger who wordlessly handed me a safety pin, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to play that precise role. I put the button back. Some objects are anchors, some are just evidence. In the days after, I started carrying a tiny flashlight on my keychain, the kind that emits more optimism than lumens. I used it to read a menu in low light, to find a screw I dropped under a couch, to retrieve a ring for a friend who forgot to take it off before kneading dough. Once, I used it to signal a cyclist about to ride into a pothole that had ambitions. And twice, I used it to help a stranger search the ground for something that mattered more than money. We like to imagine big rescues. They make better trailers. But I keep thinking about that circle of small lights, each of us aiming a beam at the same patch of world. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't even particularly effective for the first 8 minutes. But it rearranged the street into a room where a grandmother could be returned to her granddaughter by the collaborative act of squinting. Sometimes, hope is exactly that, a handful of people you'll never see again, kneeling to make the ground confess, long enough for you to find what you thought you'd lost for good. And sometimes, you get to be one of the lights. Story 2, the midnight pharmacy line. There's a particular kind of mercy that happens under fluorescent lights. The clock said too late in 3 languages. My face said, "Don't look at me." The pharmacy glowed at the corner, like a boat that had run aground. Inside, 5 of us stood in the line, reserved for last chances. A woman in scrubs, a guy holding a thermometer like a talisman, a college kid reading the directions on cough syrup, with the focus of someone discovering religion. Me, and an older man with a blanket folded over his arm. The tech behind the counter, young, steady, eyes like someone who had just figured out the password to adulthood, moved with careful speed. "We close in 5, a speaker announced, which is the kind of sentence that can either be a threat or a promise. The tech looked up and said to all of us at once, "We'll get you." It was not legally binding. It was spiritually binding. When it was my turn, I slid forward with an apology already peeking out of my mouth. "It's okay," he said. Before I could unpack it, I gave my name. He looked. He frowned. The frown that means a thing isn't where the computer swore it would be. He went to the shelves and came back empty. "Give me 3, he said, and disappeared through a door marked Employees Only, which is adulthood's version of a wardrobe to Narnia. Behind me, the man with the blanket shifted his weight like his hips kept track of storms. The woman in scrubs leaned her head back, counting ceiling tiles like seconds of sleep. The kid with the cough syrup put the bottle back, picked another, compared milligrams, like stock prices. The guy with the thermometer checked his phone and made the face people make when text messages arrive with too many ellipses. The tech returned, carrying my prescription like a waiter with a dessert he's proud of. "Found it," he said, then lowered his voice. "It got shelved under the wrong day." He scanned, bagged, stapled with the authority of a judge. I paid, grateful enough to name my firstborn after him for at least 5 minutes, and stepped aside. "Next," he said, and the man with the blanket stepped forward. "My wife," he said, then stopped because the sentence was too big. He tried again. "She's in the car. Fever. We didn't plan well." He held out a crumpled receipt with a scribbled number, a doctor's name, a hope. The tech typed. The computer considered. "I can fill this," he said, "but it'll be a few minutes." The speaker above us repeated its warning. "We close in 2. The tech met the ceiling with his eyes like a person negotiating with a god. Then he spoke the sentence that made us all love him a little. "If you're in line, you're in." He locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and kept going. The room sighed in relief, the kind you only hear in places where people bring their small emergencies in zippered jackets. We waited. The tech printed labels. The printer sang its tiny ritual song. The man with the blanket told me his wife hates asking for help, how he had to bribe her with the promise of not taking her temperature in public. The scrubs woman bought a bottle of water and fell asleep against a greeting card display that said, "Sorry for your loss," in a font too cheerful for the occasion. The kid with the syrup Google searched side effects with the suspicious hope of someone trying to convince themselves that cherry flavor is a medical benefit. Finally, the bag. The tech added a measuring spoon like a flourish. "Side effects rare," he said gently, anticipating the Google report. He leaned over the counter to explain dosage like a friend would. Not a lecture, a plan. The man with the blanket took the bag like it was a ticket home. "Thank you," he said. The tech shrugged, the shrug of people who know they just saved a night and don't need credit. As we left, the tech propped the door for us, even though the sign said, "Closed," and the world said, "Go to bed." Outside, the parking lot was its own small country, quiet, cold, ruled by the moon. In the car beside me, I caught a glimpse of a woman in the passenger seat, eyes half closed, forehead shining with the work of fighting a fever. The man climbed in, kissed her temple, and held up the bag like a flag. She smiled with one side of her face, an economy of gratitude. I sat in my car and didn't start it. I watched the tech flip off the harshest rows of lights and leave one bank on, soft, blue, like an all-night vigil. He moved behind the counter, putting things away, closing drawers, resetting a world so that morning shift wouldn't inherit chaos. I thought about jobs where no one claps, where the currency is a minute shaved off someone else's suffering. On the drive home, the streets were emptier than they had any right to be. I passed a closed bakery, an open gas station, a diner promising pancakes at unholy hours, and thought about the little ecology of mercy that exists after midnight. The way strangers agree to let each other be fragile in fluorescent lighting. I resolved to carry cash for once, so that next time I could slip a tip into a jar, even if company policy didn't encourage it. You can tip gratitude with effort, too, by not arguing at 11:58 p.m., by believing the person on the other side of the counter is tired and trying. At home, I set my prescription on the counter and drank water like I was auditioning for health. I texted a thank you to a friend who had once sat with me in a waiting room and told me terrible jokes until my name was called. Then I slept the kind of sleep you get when the world has made a small promise and kept it. I went back to the pharmacy the next week at a reasonable hour. The tech was there. Hair a little messier, smile the same. I bought a ridiculous greeting card that said, "You did a thing," and wrote inside, "Thanks for locking the door and letting us in." I left it at the counter in an envelope addressed to Night Shift Hero. He would know. He did. When I returned a month later, the card was tucked near the register, half hidden behind a display of lip balm, as if hiding made it more true. There are nights when the city feels like it's closing in. And then there are nights when a stranger flips the sign to closed, looks you in the eye, and says, "If you're in line, you're in." I carry that sentence now the way other people carry lucky coins. Story 3. The curbside chair. Some furniture tells you exactly where it wants to go. It was a Saturday of errands, pretending to be a day off. I turned down a side street, and there it was. A chair on the curb, legs crossed like a person waiting for a bus that may or may not come. A handwritten sign was taped to its back. Free, with the kind of optimistic Scotch tape that believes in both weather and strangers. Not a sad chair, a chair with a past. Mid-century lines, the wood, the warm color of toast, upholstery a stubborn teal that had survived the decade's fashion police. A small stain on one arm where a cup had once won a battle with a saucer. It was either perfect for my apartment or perfect for the person who would arrive 30 seconds after me. I stood over it, like a cloud deciding whether to rain. This is the part where, in other stories, a pickup truck materializes. In mine, a hatchback did its best to grow bigger. I tested the chair with a hand. Sturdy, not creaky, a little wobbly on one back leg, like a friend with an old injury that doesn't define them. A woman walking a dog paused. "Good one," she said, with the authority of the neighborhood's curbside curator. It was on Ms. Patel's porch for years. She moved last month, said she wanted it to find its next story. Reader, I fell a little in love with Miss Patel, whom I had never met. I tried lifting the chair alone, the way pride tells you to. The chair laughed. Pride stepped aside. I was about to abandon the attempt when a man in paint-splattered shorts appeared, like an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud. "Want a hand?" he said. We loaded the chair into the hatchback at an angle that made geometry feel like jazz. The dog, a small philosopher, watched, unimpressed. Back home, I carried the chair up 2 flights, like it was a plot twist. It fit in the corner by the window, as if the apartment had been waiting. I sat. My spine remembered something. The street below staged its slow play. Kids chalking borders for a game with no name. Someone practicing trumpet in a key the neighborhood chose to forgive. The chair gave me a view of my own plant, looking smug. I sent a text to a friend. Found a chair, free sign and everything. She replied, "Curb gods," smiling. Later, while wiping the arm with a careful cloth, I found a small envelope taped beneath the seat. Yellowed tape, stubbornly loyal. Inside, a note in tidy cursive. "If you found this, please know. I read countless novels here. If possible, place the chair near a window. It behaves best with light. MP." I laughed, then teared up, then laughed at myself for tearing up at furniture instructions that might as well have been about me. Behaves best with light. I wrote a reply and slipped it back into the envelope. "Dear MP, your chair found me. It is by a window We both are behaving better. I taped the envelope up again, because some conversations deserve to stay attached to their originals. In the days that followed, the chair accrued proof. Indentations from elbows, the rumor of a cat hair, even though I do not own a cat. An invitation to sit that strangers accepted without asking. A neighbor dropped by with a bag of limes and chose the chair without ceremony. "Good chair," she said. "It listens." When I read, the chair encouraged my posture from confession to testimony. When I stared out the window, it did not judge. One afternoon, a man from down the hall knocked to ask if anyone had seen a missing package. He stepped inside, apologized for stepping inside, then stopped mid-apology, pointing. "That chair was on Ms. Patel's porch," he said, reverent. "She always waved from it. She waved to me the day I learned I got the job. I'd like to think the chair had something to do with it." We laughed and decided that, yes, the chair was a union organizer for morale. That evening, I wheeled the chair onto the tiny balcony because weather had dressed the city nicely. A kid on a scooter zoomed past, below, looked up, and shouted, "Cool throne." I bowed. The chair accepted the compliment as its due. The next weekend, new handwriting appeared on the community board in our lobby. "Free. Small desk needs a student. Third floor landing." I recognized the impulse. When something good finds you, you look around for what you can release. I posted my own note beneath it. "Free. Lamp with good manners. Works. Not clingy." Both were gone by dusk. The building felt like a game of musical chairs, where everyone keeps sitting somewhere better. I wrote one more letter to MP and didn't tape it under the seat. I mailed it to the address on the moving box, still sitting by our recycling bin. Patel, Unit 1A, forwarding to somewhere new. I told her where the chair lived now, and that I kept the stain on the arm because it was the chair's dimple. I thanked her for trusting the city with her furniture. A week later, a postcard arrived. A watercolor of an orange. "I'm so glad," she wrote. "Chairs know. Chairs do know. They know where to rest a day. They know the exact pressure a back needs to remember it belongs to a body. They know who in the room is most likely to confess, and where the sun lands at 4. This one knows me now. I hope, if it ever leaves me, that it finds someone who reads and laughs and writes notes to strangers. Sometimes the best things are the ones that come without a receipt, already seasoned with someone else's life, delivered by a sign that trusts you. The chair on the curb wasn't a rescue. It was an introduction. We're still getting to know each other. We behave best with light. Story 4. The shared headphones. Sometimes the sky gets kinder at 30,000 feet because two people decide it can. Airports make bold promises about control and then introduce weather like a plot twist. Our flight had been delayed, undelayed, and then boarded in that stampede calm way humans have mastered. I'd drawn a middle seat, penance for not checking in early, and had already planned my strategy. Shrink, sip water slowly, pretend knees are theoretical. The aisle filled with carry-ons that had grown fat on gate changes. A dad across from me juggled a car seat, a diaper bag, and the lesson of humility. 2 rows ahead, a baby warmed up his vowels like an opera singer. I took a breath and put my phone in airplane mode, which always feels like putting my brain on a leash. Headphones, forgotten on the kitchen counter, next to the bowl where I keep coins that never get spent. The PA barked its language of seatbelts and exits, and the thing about tampering with smoke alarms, as if anyone could find them. I had resigned myself to the raw sound of air travel when the window seat woman beside me tapped my arm. She had the vibe of someone who liked maps. "You can share mine," she said, holding up a splitter, the tiny, miraculous tool that turned solitude into a duet. The wire looked like an olive branch. "I download movies I never watch because I end up people watching," she added, smiling like it was a confession. I hesitated, embarrassed by my lack of preparedness and by the intimacy of occupying the same soundtrack as a stranger. "I'll be quiet," she said, as if music required permission. I nodded. We plugged in. She cued a film I'd been meaning to see and never had. A small story with big heart and a score that sounded like rain learning manners. The captain punched through a ceiling of clouds, and the plane climbed into that high bright where everything looks forgiven. We watched the first 10 minutes in parallel silence, breathing syncing the way it does with shared attention. Our elbows negotiated space with the unspoken rules of air travel. Trespass, retreat, apologize, repeat. On screen, a character lost something. On screen, someone else found it. I smiled. So did she. The headphone wire made a tidy bridge. About 20 minutes in, the baby decided to audition for the role of Tiny Hurricane. Cries came in gusts, then gales. The mother's face frayed with the effort of being both apologetic and calm. The man in the row ahead turned, then remembered himself, then offered his keys as a jingle. The baby rejected capitalism. The mom whispered promises to the air. I felt the plane tighten, that collective clench people do when they forget they were infants once. My seatmate hit pause and took one earbud out. "Hold on," she said, then unzipped a small pouch with the confidence of a person who has a plan. Out came a crinkly emergency blanket, the kind that looks like tinfoil and saves nights, and a cheap pair of foam earplugs. She handed the earplugs to the man who'd turned, pantomiming how to roll them. He blinked, surprised, then grateful. She tore the blanket in half. "I did not know you could," and fashioned a little reflective tent over the baby's car seat. Less light, less stimulation, less audience. The infant frowned at physics and then sighed. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," with eyes that made the aisle brighter. We resumed the movie, now inside a cabin that had learned something about itself. The flight attendants slid carts down the aisle with the haphazard elegance of professionals. A bag of pretzels did its best to be generous. Somewhere over a state stitched in squares, we hit turbulence. Nothing dramatic, just the kind that sifts your thoughts like flour. The window seat woman laid her palm flat on the armrest, a steadying gesture that steadied more than plastic. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it go. At the halfway mark, we paused again because, of course, she had snacks. "Almond?" she offered. I rationed them like wartime. I took 2, then 3, when she made a face that meant, "Don't be polite." We chewed in companionable quiet. On screen, the film offered small mercies. A bus that waited, a hand that held, a goodbye that forgave itself. We didn't talk much, no origin stories or future plans, just occasional comments about cinematography and how this exact music would level us if it played in a grocery store. When the credits rolled, we didn't clap. This isn't France. But we sat for a minute in that soft silence good stories make, the kind where neither of you wants to be first to stand, because gravity seems newly negotiable. Our descent began. The captain did the thing with the seatbelt sign. The city below arranged itself into twinkling hordes of possibility. The baby, now sleeping, snored with the authority of a cat. My seatmate rewound to a favorite scene and let the sound play just loudly enough for me to catch a line I'd missed. We shared a grin that belong to people who've just met and somehow conspired. Taxi. Gate. The choreography of exit. Stand too soon, shuffle, pretend you're not a body in a maze. She tucked the splitter into its tidy case. I admired the level of preparedness that deserves a medal. "Thanks," I said. It felt insufficient. "You saved my brain." She shrugged. "We're all trapped in a tube together," she said. "Might as well share the soundtrack." At the jet bridge, she waited for the mother with the baby, handed her the other half of the space blanket, and said, "For later." The mother folded it like treasure. The man with the earplugs caught our eyes and saluted with the small green cylinders, now his prized possessions. We laughed. The line moved. At baggage claim, we fanned back into our separate narratives. I watched her disappear into a crowd that belonged to different reunions, a small hero with a splitter and a mind like a Swiss Army knife. My suitcase took 12 minutes to appear. I didn't mind. I spent them making a note in my phone. Keep an extra. Share what makes solitude kinder. Now, when I pack, the splitter goes in the pocket with my boarding pass. I carry an extra pair of cheap earbuds, not because I expect to save anyone's day, but because it keeps mine pointed toward generosity. Once, on a bus, I lent them to a kid who had forgotten his, and he gave them back with a look that said, "You didn't make me choose between noise and boredom." Another time, I shared an audiobook chapter with a stranger on a delayed train. We looked up at the same moment and said, "Wow," which felt like the tidy end of a paragraph. There's a particular intimacy to sharing sound. You agree to hear the world at the same volume for a while. You agree to be altered by the same notes. On that flight, at that altitude, with that baby, and that blanket, and that score, we tuned ourselves to kindness. It's not complicated. It felt like weather we could control. Story 5. The Ticket of Mercy. Not every fine is about money. Sometimes it's about the story you get to tell about yourself afterward. I came back to the car and saw it. The little white triangle tucked under the wiper like a dare. The meter had expired by 7 minutes. Long enough for me to narrate 1,000 reasons why the universe should make an exception. I'd been delivering soup to a sick friend. I'd been stuck in a line behind the only person in town who still writes checks. I'd been, in short, very me. The parking officer was 3 cars down, stylus in hand, moving with a calm that probably required practice. He looked exactly like someone internet comments love to hate, which is to say, in uniform. I have been unkind in my head to his profession more times than I like to admit. Today, my head wanted to rehearse invective. I took a breath instead. "Hey," I said, jogging my politeness up a notch. "That mine?" He glanced at the plate, at me, at his handheld. "Afraid so," he said. His voice sounded like coffee at 6 in the morning. I opened my mouth to deliver my bibliography of excuses. He waited, a professional listener to reasons that have shaped entire civilizations of frustration. I began, and then stopped. "I was late," I said, which was both the truth and not the whole story. "I'll pay it." He nodded. "Appreciate the honesty." He peeled the ticket from its nest and handed it to me, like a receipt for being a person. I looked at the amount, winced. He caught the wince and said, "If it helps, they made me write the last one for a city contractor." It did help, a little. Equity isn't grace, but it builds a floor. We stood there a second longer than strangers usually do on sidewalks. He had the look of someone who had been yelled at enough times to make the idea of conversation feel like a vacation. "How's your day?" I asked, and meant it. He laughed. "Honestly, Less yelling than last Tuesday. He tucked the stylus behind his ear. People think we like this part, he said, waving the ticket book. We like the parts where people are fair. I told him about the soup, not as an excuse, just as context. He told me about the best bagel within walking distance, which felt like community service. We were quiet for a beat, listening to a distant siren make its plea. He looked at my plate again, then at the ticket. I can void this if you were within 5, he said, half to me, half to the bylaws. You're at 7, he sighed. I hate 7s. A choice arrived. One of those small forks that decide which version of you lives the rest of the day. Write it, I said. I was at 7. He nodded once, as if he'd been holding his breath, waiting to see who I was. Tell you what, he said, lowering his voice like we were in on a secret. I can mark it as a warning if you can show me a current pay stub under minimum wage. He grinned. Kidding. Then softer. I can't undo the clock, but I can give you the grace I'm allowed. He pulled a small sticker from his pocket, citation warned, and stuck it to the corner of the ticket. It still records, he said, but there's no fee this time. He tilted his head. You looked like you were going to apologize to the asphalt. That's worth something. I laughed, relief mixing with embarrassment. Thank you, I said. I'll feed the meter like it's a hungry kid from now on. He smiled. The meter is the hungriest kid I know. We shook hands, which felt absurd and exactly right. He moved on, issuing justice in 30-second increments. I put quarters in the meter until it purred. Then I sat in my car for a minute, holding the ticket. Warned, in all caps, looked less like a scolding and more like a reminder with teeth. I folded it into my glove compartment, like a talisman. That afternoon, I found a spot in a different part of town and watched a driver in front of me pull into a loading-only space with the confidence of a person who had never read a sign. He looked around, weighed the odds, got out. 20 minutes later, the truck returned that needed the space. It couldn't fit. The driver, tired, hot, behind, honked once in the key of right. The car owner sprinted out of a shop holding a smoothie and a face that said sorry. The truck driver started to yell. Something in me flinched in recognition. I walked over. I can help direct you, I told the truck driver, if you give me 1 minute to help him move. It was nothing, and it was everything. We reshuffled. The truck slid in. Humans exchanged the minimum viable eye contact. The car owner turned to me, about to download his reasons. I know, I said. I do too. He laughed, shook his head, and, miracle of miracles, fed the meter 2 hours and left the spot, choosing to walk an extra block. I don't think I was the cause. I think the warned in my glove compartment had changed what I saw. A week later, I ran into the parking officer again on a different street, different sun. He was helping an older woman decipher the app that pretends to be a parking meter. It thinks I'm in Tokyo, she said, genuinely worried she might get a bill from a city she'd never seen. He was patient. The map finally decided to be local, and a ticket was avoided, not by mercy, but by understanding. When she left, I said, I owe you a coffee. He shook his head. Just put your blinker on when you parallel park. You'd be amazed how many people think mystery is part of the thrill. Now, when I approach a meter, I treat it like a small contract rather than a petty tyrant. I leave quarters on top of empty meters, like breadcrumbs. Once, I slipped a note under a stranger's wiper. You're at 1 torme. I fed it for 15. Pay it forward if you can. I don't know if they did. I know I will again, because generosity with time feels like the exact antidote to living as if clocks are against us. Not every fine is about money. Some are about the person you get to be when no one is grading you. The day I said write it and meant it, the city handed me back a few degrees of freedom. The officer didn't cancel reality. He edited it with the grace available to him. I carry that edit now, folded neatly, reminding me that 7 minutes late can become the version of me who shows up 5 minutes early for someone else. Story 6. The chalkboard fix. Some rescues wear a key ring and walk the halls before dawn. My friend teaches 2nd grade in a building that has decided to be older than it is. Pipes sigh, windows stick, radiators hiss like old cats. I came to help set up her room before the first day, laminating name tags with the zeal of a person who once found office supplies soothing. We were deep into the ritual, bookshelves alphabetized by optimism, when the chalkboard announced its betrayal. The center section wouldn't raise. It stuck at kid-eye level like a stubborn eyelid, refusing to reveal the whiteboard behind it, where her carefully planned schedule would live. We tugged, we pleaded, we consulted the internet, which suggested solutions that required tools we didn't own, and upper body strength we had misreported on forms. Panic's first cousin, annoyance, moved in. "It did this last spring," she said. "Mr. Kent fixed it with magic and a cough." We went to find him. Every school has a Mr. Kent, a head custodian, who knows which radiator listens and which doesn't, who keeps a supply closet like a hardware store in miniature, who calls everyone Bud, no matter their age or pay grade. We found him in the hallway repairing a chair that had decided to be a maraca. He looked up over his glasses and took us in like a triage nurse. "Board stuck?" he asked, as if the building had whispered our secret to him through the vents. We nodded, humbled by the speed of his guess. He followed us to the room, keys, singing a song only long corridors know. He pressed the chalkboard with the palm of his hand, the way a doctor checks for a fever, and grunted, which in custodian means, "I hear you." He reached into a pocket and produced a flathead screwdriver that had lived there long enough to count as a relative. 2 twists at the base, one near the pulley, a gentle lift that said, "I respect your age," and the board slid up like a curtain on opening night. The whiteboard shone in its clean, wipeable promise. We thanked him with a chorus that made him wave the air, embarrassed. "It's just physics and old brackets," he said. "Everything in this place wants to fall a little. Our job is to remind it of up." He tightened a 2nd screw no one had asked him to, then looked around the room like a parent at a sleepover. "You got what you need?" he asked. The list in my friend's head was short on paper, long on longing. "We're okay," she lied. He heard the italics. He returned 10 minutes later with a rolling cart he must have summoned by bell, a fresh box of dry erase markers, a replacement clock battery, an extension cord, and a tiny plant in a plastic pot so cheery it bordered on brave. "For your window," he said. "It's a fighter." My friend took it like a morale patch. While he was there, a student teacher popped in, panicked. "My room's thermostat says 88, she announced, as if reciting a plague. Mr. Kent nodded once, already moving. "It lies by 10, he said. "Crack the window. I'll visit its feelings later." He left us with the soft slam of a door that had decided not to complain that day. We finished the room in an hour, made shorter by the feeling that the building had chosen our side. Name tags, aligned, like a tiny parade. The schedule, now visible thanks to the resurrected whiteboard, looked like sanity, reading, stretch, math, story, lunch, recess, science, pack. We stepped back, 2 grown women tearing up at the sight of small chairs living in their gentle rows. "It'll never look like this again," she said. "But for now, it's a promise." On the first day, I swung by with coffee strong enough to negotiate. The hallway smelled like crayons and nerves. Kids filed in, holding backpacks that looked like they might hold a piano. One small boy stood in the doorway, paralyzed by the concept of entering a new space. My friend knelt to eye level and said, "We'll do this together." He nodded, unparalyzed. The board stayed up. The plant looked valiantly green. The clock, new battery, ticked in a key the room accepted. Halfway through the morning, the projector refused to admit it was connected. My friend pressed source with increasing levels of intimacy. Nothing. Mr. Kent appeared, summoned by the particular frequency of a teacher's sigh. "This old one wants flattery," he said, and tapped a port with the screwdriver's cousin. The image bloomed. A cheer rose that belonged to sports. He took a small bow. "Teach," he said, and vanished. Over the next weeks, his fixes multiplied in the background. Like punctuation, a hinge stopped narrating every entrance. A sink that dripped a language of panic quieted. When a child spilled a whole day's worth of glitter in a moment of exuberant catastrophe, he arrived with a vacuum and a joke. "We're going to make the moon jealous." He let the kid hold the hose. The child grew 3 inches. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, mean and fast. The lights flickered. A transformer somewhere threw a tantrum. The building sighed and gave us a break. Emergency lighting glowed. Children murmured in a register designed by evolution to summon calm adults. My friend began the dance of talking 22 small people into seeing darkness as adventure. Mr. Kent appeared in the doorway, wearing a headlamp like a lighthouse. "Flashlight reading?" he suggested. 22 hands shot up. He distributed 5 small lights from pockets that had apparently been saving this day. He stationed himself in the hall like a sentry, while rain tried and failed to get in. After the storm, when the sun apologized with a smear of gold, I found him in the boiler room, his kingdom, checking gauges like a priest with rituals. "You always show up before anyone asks," I said. He shrugged. "If I wait, I'm late." He wiped a pipe with a rag that had already lived 9 lives. "This building's old," he added. "Old things can still be good. They just want to be understood daily." At the end of the term, the chalkboard misbehaved again. We went to find him and found instead a note on his door. "Back in 5, don't lift heavy. K." We waited, and in those 5 minutes, I realized what his presence had done over months. It had made a place feel like a promise. Not that nothing would break, everything would, but that someone would come when it did, with a ring of keys and a flathead, and a way of talking to screws that made them want to be helpful. He came back, lifted the board with the same gentle authority, and then taught us how. Where to press, how to listen for the click that means cooperation. "I'll always come," he said, "but you might as well learn the trick." He watched us try, did not mock our awkwardness, let us succeed. The board slid up, the whiteboard shone. The plant kept trying. Now, when something sticks in my life, a drawer, a conversation, a habit, I hear his voice. Everything wants to fall a little. Remind it of up. I look for the screw that needs a quarter turn, the bracket that wants to be seen, the friend who needs a headlamp held while they fumble for the right switch. Some rescues don't broadcast themselves. They walk the halls before dawn, keys singing, fixing the day so we can teach and learn and be less afraid of what breaks. Story 7. The parking lot jump. There's a particular relief that only comes when a stranger says, "Pop the hood," Sunday afternoon parking lots have their own weather. Heat rising from asphalt, shopping carts migrating like ungainly birds, a wind that smells faintly of oranges from the grocery 2 doors down. I turned the key and got the sound that belongs on a heart monitor, not a dashboard. The weak click-click that says nothing today. My car, old enough to have opinions, new enough to have pride, had decided to nap. I looked around for a miracle shaped like a tow truck, and instead found a man in a faded ball cap loading mulch into a trunk. He moved with the steadiness of someone who likes lifting things because it reminds them they exist. I weighed the math of asking. Pride argued for martyrdom. Practicality rolled its eyes. "Excuse me," I said, walking over. "Any chance you have cables?" He did. Of course he did. He had them coiled like a fire hose, red and black, clipped together so they wouldn't get ideas. "Pop the hood," he said, and the phrase slackened my shoulders. There's a generosity in competence. No drama, just instructions you can follow. He shuffled his car nose to nose with mine, the way friendship sometimes looks in suburban habitats, and we raised our hoods like flags. "Ever done this?" he asked. "Once," I said, 15 years ago, in a snowstorm, with a YouTube tutorial that buffered at the worst possible time. He laughed, set the clamps down on my battery with the delicacy of a jeweler, and narrated as he worked. Red to dead, red to donor, black to donor, black to ground. He gestured toward a bolt on my engine block. "Ground is your friend. Keep sparks out of the places they don't belong." We waited the minute you always wait, long enough for hope to climb into the front seat. He asked the polite question everyone eventually asks. "Battery original?" I admitted I had treated it like a philosophy. If I don't think about it, perhaps it will live forever. He nodded, the way a mechanic nods at a parable. They go when they go. The lot kept doing its lot things around us. A child negotiated for a balloon. A couple navigated the marriage test of returning a cart without killing each other. Someone tried to refit a flat-pack shelf into a sedan and discovered mathematics has boundaries. My helper glanced at his watch, but didn't hurry the electrons. "Try it," he said. I turned the key, and the engine caught, like a friend returning a call. The particular music of alternator plus relief filled the space between us. "Yes," I said stupidly, like the word could do the follow-up work of gratitude. He smiled, unclamped, and coiled the cables with the practiced intimacy of a person who has rescued enough strangers to prefer tidy endings. "How much do I owe you?" I asked. And he said, "The thing good people say. Next time you see somebody with a hood up, be me." He wiped his hands on a rag that had known better days and added, "Also, get a new battery. Soon." I promised both. He closed my hood with the gentleness that separates kindness from showing off. Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached into his trunk and pulled out a cheap, brand new set of jumper cables, still zip-tied in their plastic, and handed them to me. "Keep these," he said. "The other set is my favorite." "I don't share favorites." I protested. He shook his head. "I buy a pair every spring because batteries are optimists." He tilted his chin at my dash. "Drive around for 20 minutes. Let it charge." I drove. 20 minutes became 30 because it felt like owning a small piece of competence with my name on it. I imagined the grid of our city from above, lines of roads, and on them, little moments like mine. Hoods popped, cables passed, strangers narrating the logic of electrons. I pictured the man in the cap as a node in a benevolent network. Mulch, errands, rescues. At home, I made a sticky note. Battery. tomorrow. I stuck it on the door where only ambition or bad memory could miss it. Then I wrote a second note and tucked it into my glove box along with the new cables. If you're reading this because your car said no, it will say yes. I can help. Call me if you need hands. I added my number because some gestures require risk. I imagined future me handing the note to a stranger with a voice that sounded like "Pop the hood." The next day, the guy at the auto shop tested my old battery the way teachers test essays. Patient, merciless. "She's done," he said, patting the case like a shoulder. He installed the new one with the quiet competence of a person who respects every job done well. "You're good for a while," he said. "Don't make it 15 years. I promised again." 2 weeks later, in a different lot outside a library, I saw a hood up. A woman my age stood with the particular stillness of someone repeating the same short prayer. "Not today, please, not today." I recognized the look. I recognized the scene, down to the coil of hesitation in my own body. I parked nose to nose, held up my still box-fresh cables like a talisman, and said, "Pop the hood." Her relief was immediate and unembarrassed. We set up the small altar of clamps and generosity. I narrated, stealing shamelessly from the mulch man's script. She laughed at the phrase, "read to dead," like it was a joke written for us. When the engine turned, she almost cried, which is the exact right reaction to being restored to motion. "How much?" she started. I shook my head. "Next time you see a hood up, be us." We put the cables away, like we were folding a flag. On the drive home, I thought about how competence can be contagious if someone hands you the right tool with the right sentence. Pop the hood. It's instructions. It's permission. It's a way to become the version of yourself who knows how to move wires around fear. I keep the cables in the trunk now the way some people keep Lucky Charms. They don't guarantee anything, but they turn me into a person with a plan. And whenever I see a hood yawn open on a hot afternoon, I remember a stranger with mulch on his hands and time enough to share. He didn't give me a sermon. He handed me a circuit and a future where I get to say the words he said to me. Try it. Story 8. The alarm at 2 a.m. Some neighbors are quiet until the smoke alarm teaches them a chorus. At 2:04 a.m., a shriek carved the building. If alarms were words, this one would be now, repeated, until grammar failed. I sat up, already moving, the way bodies rehearse emergencies while we sleep. The sound was too sharp for a car, too insistent for a microwave tantrum. Hallway, 3rd floor. An alarm's pitch is a compass. Mine pointed north. Doors opened. Heads appeared in frames, like portraits of the startled. You hear that? Yup. Where from? Up. We converged in pajamas, and whatever we thought passed for dignity. Hoodies, slippers, one heroic bathrobe. The air didn't smell like smoke yet, which is good, but it felt charged, like the moments before weather decides. At 3C, the sound was weaponized. We knocked. No answer. Knocked harder. The door opened 2 inches, and then all the way, our neighbor stood blinking in a cloud of embarrassment as dense as anything that could have come off a pan. "I burned a late grilled cheese," she said. Voice pitched on the edge of laughing or crying. Behind her, a window was cracked. A towel flapped at the ceiling. The alarm argued with physics. We moved in because urgency can be a permission slip. Someone grabbed the towel and fanned. Someone else, an engineer by day and evidently a fixer by night, reached for the alarm, twisted, and spoke to it with firm hands. Press here, hold. The device ignored reason and continued its aria. The engineer unsnapped the battery like a magician disarming a trick. Silence dropped so hard, we all heard our own hearts recalibrate. "Sorry," 3C said into the sudden quiet, eyes glossy. "I work late. You thought you were hungry," I said. "You were right." A neighbor who always wears socks with fruit on them opened the window wider, and the cool night inhaled our group. Someone else poured water over the sink's steaming pan, steam clouding what I had hoped would remain a drama-free Wednesday. We stood in the kitchen, watching the room reset. The burned sandwich, blackened like a fairy tale lesson, sat in the sink, pretending to be charcoal. 3C sagged against the counter, relief and shame playing rock, paper, scissors on her face. "I'm new," she said, as if the alarm had been an initiation. "Welcome," said Fruit Socks. With such sincerity, we laughed. "First rule," said the engineer, "is don't trust the broil setting after midnight." He reinserted the battery. The alarm, now tamed, blinked a red eye and kept its opinions to itself. We trickled into the hall, oxygen returning to our shared brain. Someone proposed tea. Someone else countered with cocoa. We compromised by standing barefoot in the corridor, trading stories that only get told at 2 a.m., naps taken on wrong trains, fire drills in high school, where you were certain it was not a drill, the best and worst things you've ever burned. Mine, a saucepan I tried to teach patience to. It failed the class. 3C brought out a plate of cookies that might have been bought for a future, better moment. We ate them in the hall, cooling as fast as our adrenaline. Fruit Socks dashed down to her apartment and returned with a small fan that clipped to a chair and made an earnest breeze. The engineer fetched a step stool so the alarm could be remounted at a dignified height. Someone texted the building group chat, "All okay. Sandwich incident. Bring jokes, not hoses." In the absence of catastrophe, community arrived. We learned 3C's name, Kira. We learned she worked swing shift at the hospital, delivering meals to people who didn't want to be where they were. We learned the engineer's headlamp has 3 settings in a sense of humor. We learned Fruit Socks is a baker on weekends and considers cookies legitimate currency. Around 2:40, the hall thinned. Sleep reclaimed the sensible. I stayed another 10 minutes with Kira, fanning the last of the smoky guilt from her ceiling. "I didn't know it would be like this," she said. "Living with people." I smiled. "Me neither. Turns out we're loud and helpful." Before I left, I checked her alarm again. The test beep startled us both and then comforted us in the same breath. "It's a good sound when you choose it," she said. "Exactly," I said. Like honesty, I promised her our group chat could handle future culinary adventures, and went back to my apartment, my pajamas infused with eau de grilled cheese. The next day, someone slid a note under Kira's door. "Welcome to floor 3. Here's a fan schedule if you need it. Here's a spare battery. Here's a recipe for grilled cheese that forgives you." Someone else taped a small index card to the wall by the alarm with a drawing of a sandwich. In the caption, "Remember me kindly." It was ridiculous and perfect. Weeks later, at a more civilized hour, I burned toast. The alarm in my kitchen took offense. I opened the window, waved a towel, and then, without thinking, texted the group, "Toast emergency, under control." 3 supportive emojis arrived, plus Fruit Socks offer. "I have extra jam if you need morale." I sat at my table and laughed. The laugh tasted like cocoa at 2 a.m. Now, when I hear a distant beep in another building, I think of that night and how fragility introduced us to each other with more kindness than small talk ever has. There's a particular kind of neighbor you only meet under alarms. They are the ones who show up with a step stool, who know where the test button is, who tell you stories until your hands stop shaking, who believe that mistakes are just invitations written in a loud font. I hope Kira never burns another sandwich. I also hope, selfishly, that if she does, I'm home. Story 9. The Borrowed Leash. Every park has a moment when it reveals itself as a village. A loose dog, happy, clueless, kinetic, did the fast figure 8 of animals who have suddenly remembered their wolf ancestry. The owner, breathless and apologetic to the universe, jogged after, calling a name that sounded like a popped bubble. Boba! Boba, buddy! Boba was having a grand, illegal time. Ears like flags, tongue like a flagpole. Our park is a democracy of leashes. There's an off-leash hour before 9 a.m. when dogs release their wiggles and people pretend they too are free. After that, it's compromise. Leashes on, squirrels safe. This was a post-9 romp. A toddler watched with the wide, bless you look toddlers reserve for chaos. Need a leash? I asked, lifting mine like a spare vowel. My dog, Nora, looked at me with benevolent betrayal. I thought that was ours, and then, generous soul, wagged anyway. The owner nodded, mortified relief on his face. We performed the choreography that is part lasso, part bribery, part poetry. Boba did not appreciate art. He appreciated zoomies. The leash snapped air. This is where the village emerged. A woman with a dignified greyhound extended a handful of treats that could convince a saint. A teenager offered his skateboard as a gentle blockade. A man with a stroller positioned his wheels like rhetorical parentheses. We narrowed Boba's available universe without making it feel like a trap. Hey, buddy, I said, lowering my voice to the register animals use for secrets. The greyhound woman whispered, cheese, like a code word. Boba froze. Cheese is a spiritual practice. The owner clipped the borrowed leash to Boba's collar with the sigh of a person whose heart has just come off a treadmill. Thank you, he said 3 times, to 3 different people, like we each held a separate piece of grace. He squatted to Boba's level. You terrified me, he said, which is a sentence we reserve mostly for people we love. Boba wagged, unrepentant. We stood there, strangers at the shameless altar of dog, and debriefed. Gate latch is sticky, the stroller man said. Happens, the teenager nodded. I can bring WD-40. The greyhound woman, who had the air of someone who organizes PTA fundraisers without breaking a sweat, said, Let's do a little leash library. She pointed at the park bulletin board where flyers go to dream of being read. Hook, sign, a couple spare leashes. People can borrow and return. It was ridiculous and immediately correct. By afternoon, we had a plan. I brought 2 cheap nylon leashes I wasn't precious about. The teenager delivered WD-40 and the satisfaction of a latch that no longer lied. The stroller man printed a sign with the politest bossiness. Borrow a leash. Please return. Add one if you can. The greyhound woman brought a small hook and a tiny jar of cheese cubes labeled Emergency. We affixed everything to the board with the joy of people who have just lowered the average chaos. The library worked. It worked like small, sensible things work, without fanfare. I watched people use it. The embarrassed owner whose dog learned to slip collars, the calm sitter walking 5 personalities on 4 legs, the kid whose parent forgot the leash and didn't want to model rules are suggestions. Borrow, clip, return. Cheese, Sometimes. A week later, I was the borrower. Nora's leash broke with the soft surrender of old nylon. Snap. Freedom. She's a good dog. And stay is a word that means something to her. But streets dislike experiments. I jogged to the board, grabbed a leash, clipped it, and felt the gratitude that comes from being saved by your own idea. I left one of my backups as tithe. The jar of cheese had been replaced twice by anonymous saints. The hook held. The sign accumulated polite weather scars. We extended the idea. A second hook appeared, with poop bags, written in a hand that could have been a middle school art teacher's. A laminated index card offered the number for a volunteer who knew about lost pets and could mobilize a phone tree. Someone printed a QR code that linked to Found Dogs of Our Neighborhood, which I did not know was a thing and now cannot imagine life without. Boba's owner, his name turned out to be Ty, returned my leash with a note attached. To the village, because you had one when I did not. He tucked a folded 5 into the note. I taped it to the jar and wrote, Cheese Fund, with a heart that embarrassed me and that I left anyway. The park began to feel not just like a strip of grass, but like a conversation. People said hello as if we'd already agreed on something. A woman I hadn't met handed me a roll of bags and said, For the board. A man with a cane asked if he could sit with Nora because his dog had died and his hands missed the choreography of ears. Nora allowed this with the solemnity of a chaplain. One evening, rain started with that shy sprinkle that thinks it's asking permission. A jogger slipped, ankle bending into the alphabet. The teenager, our WD-40 guy, materialized with a small first aid kit he now kept under the bench because why not? We wrapped, iced, called a ride. The leash library watched, its hook holding the weight of a quiet idea. When something breaks, latches, leashes, peace, our first instinct is often to declare it a personal failing. The park taught me a different grammar. We is a tool. We can WD-40 a hinge. We can put a leash where a leash might be needed. We can write emergency cheese and mean it. Boba still runs sometimes because joy cannot be fully legislated. But now his owner carries a spare in a pocket of cheddar. Nora forgave me for sharing our leash. She likes being part of governance. And I carry a lesson folded into my pocket like a plastic bag. When you have an extra, hang it on a hook someone can reach without asking permission. Story 10. The Little Free Pantry. Abundance is messy. It shows up in soup cans and shy notes and the sound a door makes when it never locks. The pantry looked like a birdhouse that had decided to get into social work. A wooden box on a post, glass door, hand-painted letters. Take what you need, leave what you can. It had appeared on the corner between the laundromat and the bus stop sometime in late spring, the week everything smelled like wet cement and wishful thinking. At first, I didn't trust it. It's hard to believe in promises that don't require a password. One Sunday, I opened it. Inside, 2 cans of chickpeas, a sleeve of crackers, a box of tea missing 3 bags, a bar of soap wrapped in kindness, a note in cursive. If you need diapers, knock at 14B between 5 to 7. The shelves were a little sticky, as if Honey had auditioned for membership and been accepted. I closed the door gently so the generosity wouldn't spill. The next time, I left a jar of peanut butter and a small jar of jam, because sandwiches are diplomacy. I taped a Post-it to the inside wall. PB is new. Jam is homemade. No allergies in the neighborhood group chat. LMK. The following day, my Post-it had acquired 2 hearts and the word thank you in a handwriting that made me want to be better. I started checking the pantry the way you check a friend's porch light when you walk by. Is it on? Is someone home? Some days it overflowed. Cereal boxes jostling, pasta leaning like architecture students. Some days it held a single, proud can of tomatoes, keeping watch. Once, the door was open, and a pigeon, delinquent and adorable, stood inside as if considering whole grain choices. We negotiated. I won. It left in a huff that made me laugh alone on the sidewalk. I learned the pantry's rhythms. Monday after payday, generous. End of month, spare. When the weather was mean, people took more soap. When school started, snack packs appeared like confetti. A grocery store clerk on our block told me she set aside damaged box items for the pantry because food doesn't stop being food when cardboard loses ambition. One dusk, I found a woman rearranging the shelves with the precision of a librarian. She wore a denim jacket that had known both rain and insistence. "You the steward?" I asked. She smiled. "We all are. I'm Marta." She showed me the chalk mark on the post, a subtle line to measure if the pantry was getting leaned on by the wind or by love. "I wipe it down Wednesdays," she said. "If you want to shift, the rags in a plastic bin behind the hydrangeas." I signed up without paperwork. I wiped shelves. I sorted. I learned to put heavy things low and surprises high. I added a small notebook to the corner, recipes and requests. The first entry made me cry in public, like an absolute amateur. "Thank you for the tea." It made the night less loud. Another asked for rice. Another offered to trade. "We have diapers, size 2. Need wipes." The notebook became a miniature economy of polite need. Someone left a stack of index cards with recipes that can be made from pantry staples. Chickpeas plus pasta plus lemon, if you have it, became a neighborhood hit. Rice and beans, 3 ways, felt like a manifesto. Someone else added a card for how to make your own stock, which read like a love letter to onion ends. One afternoon, I watched a teenager approach, look both ways as if crossing a moral street, and take a single granola bar with the care of a surgeon. I pretended not to see, because dignity is a shelf too. He left a note. Ode, 1 bar, will repay in kindness. 2 days later, he taped a pack of pencils to the door with a post-it. For homework. He had kept his ledger. The pantry got vandalized once. Door cracked, shelves knocked. We felt the bruise collectively. Marta posted in the group chat. Repair party, Saturday, 10 a.m. 10 people showed up with drills, paint, bread, stories. We fixed the hinge and decided on a shade of blue that looked like sky distilled. A kid drew a tiny sun in the corner. We added a latch that wouldn't break at the hint of weather. We ate bread with the jam I'd made and called it communion. I started placing little anchors in the pantry. A jar of dog food with for pups, because hungry doesn't always walk on 2 legs. A few travel-size shampoos labeled for first days at a new job. A stack of index cards that simply said, "You are not alone." The cards disappeared first. In winter, a box of hand warmers appeared with a sticker. Take 2, 1 for each pocket. A pair of wool socks showed up in a Ziploc with a note. Clean. Wear in good health. Someone tucked in packets of hot chocolate that made the corner smell like a memory. A woman I recognized from the bus stopped me at the pantry and gave me a hug that said, we had both survived something we hadn't discussed. The pantry taught me the paradox of abundance. The more I put in, the taller I felt. The more I took out to redistribute, the less I believed in scarcity. I started keeping a pantry bag by my door. When I bought 2 of something, One went in the bag. When I cleaned my kitchen and found that I owned 7 of the same spice, because hope makes duplicates, the extras became public domain. I learned the pantry's taboos: expired milk, no thanks, and its heroes: shelf-stable milk, yes, please. One evening, I opened the door and found it full of paper cranes. Dozens, folded from magazine pages, perching on cans like cheerful birds. A note: for luck, for pretty. I left them, because sometimes the need is not calories, but color. Over the days, the cranes migrated into diaper bags, pockets, lunch pails. I found one weeks later on a bus seat and felt like I'd been greeted by a friend. Now, when I pass by, I straighten labels, tuck notes under jars, and read the new thank yous like postcards from a city made kinder by a wooden box. Your soap made me feel human for a job interview. We got through the weekend. Do you have a can opener? We do now, tied to the shelf with string, so it can't wander far. The pantry door never locks. That's the point, in the risk, in the miracle. It trusts us. We try, imperfectly, inventively, to be worthy. When I have a good day, I leave an extra. When I have a hard one, I leave a note. Once, when the shelves were bare and my wallet was thin, I sat beside the pantry and talked with Marta about soups you can make from almost nothing. The next morning, the shelves were ridiculous with plenty. Abundance is messy. It shows up mismatched and dented and heartfelt. It asks you to become a steward without a badge. It invites you to believe that enough is a community verb. The pantry didn't cure hunger. It taught me that my block knows how to pass a loaf of bread down a line of hands, and that sometimes the note you tape inside a little glass door is exactly the sentence someone needed to read to get to tomorrow. And on days when I'm the one who needs to get to tomorrow, I open the door, take a tea bag, and read a note that says, "You are not alone." Then I walk home, the kettle already agreeing.